Welcome to Rawcast AD. I'm going to start this episode, by talking about how naive I was in the previous episode, where I talked briefly about having read a book by Irvin Yalom called Staring at the Sun. It was talking about death anxiety. And I casually said, I don't really have death anxiety, blah, 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 blah. And I moved on, and that was such a naive notion, because as I progressed through the book and ended up finishing it, I realized that, yeah, you can basically bury that file of death in the cabinet in the back of your mind, and you don't really have anxiety about it because you're not thinking about it. And so after finishing the book and ruminating on it, I realized that a lot of what I do is actually motivated by death anxiety. In that particular book, they talk about the deep structures of existence and like the four big ultimate concerns, that being death, isolation, meaning in life, and freedom. And I am apparently very hung up. Sorry for my phone. I'm apparently very hung up on those ultimate concerns because other than my kids, I am rather isolated. Goodness, I should turn that phone off before I get started. My apologies. But other than my kids, I am very much isolated. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, the first few episodes, maybe the first 10, 11, 12 episodes of Rawcast, the return of Rawcast. So if you see this on the SoundCloud account, you can tell that there was something like 25 episodes of the first era of Rawcast. And now this is the second run of Rawcast. So rather than make episode 1 House Dad a continuation and basically be episode 26 of Rawcast, it felt like a completely different show, so I had to do it that way. And I'm sorry for getting caught up in that idea right now. But being somebody who was searching for meaning in life, and I am rather isolated, and I don't feel like I'm allowing myself to be more socially open or just socialize in general. And that I don't feel like I'm living as if I'm free due to the constraints of my daily life. So that being said, I've talked about how it feels like time may be running out, and that very much is death anxiety. It's just, I didn't take it for what it was because I wasn't understanding enough of the concept in Dr. Yalom's book, Staring at the Sun, to grasp that. So I apologize to any listeners that heard me say, I don't really have death anxiety, because that was a very almost cavalier thing to say. It's like, yes, imagine you are water skiing on a lake. Well, yeah, you're not at the bottom of the lake. You're kind of just skimming across the top, so you can go, oh yeah, I'm not going scuba diving. I'm not going in the water. I haven't really gotten that wet. Well, yeah, until you slow down enough that you start to submerge and go down into the depths a little bit. When you're skirting across the surface and not giving your time to sit down and think about the concept and think about the topic, you aren't necessarily going to have that anxiety. Especially if you're somebody who has the ability to control your anxiety. And that's not a knock on anybody. We all have our own struggles to get through. But very much so do I have my life motivations pushed by death anxiety. I'm constantly reminding myself that life is short. If my wife and I get into an argument before one of us has to go to work, we still hug, kiss, love you, goodbye, still mad at you, but I still love you. Because you never know. Life can drastically change like a flip of a switch. And so, surprisingly, for me, finishing up Staring at the Sun had me ruminating on death anxiety for a while. Being able to partition my mind and actually allow myself to think about the topic without getting sucked into the void. I realize that time is short. I'm already in my 30s and I don't feel like I've accomplished anything in life. Which I have. Don't get me wrong. Count your blessings. I know what my blessings are. But there's still a lot of life left to live ahead of me, and I don't want the years to run out before I can get that done. So if anything, from that book, I realized that I need to buckle down. Maybe I do need to put up a vision board again. Maybe I do need to become better at setting goals so that I can achieve them. Remember the movie Dodgeball? If you set your sights low, if you kind of have unambitious goals, you'll never be disappointed. That's not the way to go, because you end up just floating through life, and a lot of times you're not going to find the meaning in life that you need. So, the direction that I'm moving in now, I do have to make sure that I don't get too hungry. Because this is where we go back to like how I felt when I was working sales. It was like in a good month, you were hungry, you were happy, you were upbeat, you were just ready to go, 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 go. Get it done, get it done, get it done. Next customer, next customer, next customer. You were riding the high of a good month. And then during the bad months, depression would set in, anxiety would set in. Oh, my commission check's not going to be big. Oh, God, what? Are we going to be able to afford Christmas gifts this month if I keep up with this funk that I'm stuck in? And the thing is, the extreme highs and the extreme lows were very off-putting with that type of job. So I had to get away from that, but the highs and lows are always going to be there. It's not necessarily that I was leaving the job so much as I was leaving an environment that was exacerbating the highs and lows that I would experience. And so let's look at those 4 deep structures of existence, the 4 ultimate concerns of death, isolation, meaning in life, and freedom. Well, if death is my motivation, I could die tomorrow, so I better get those dishes done today, because when the coroner comes in to identify my body, I don't want flies in the fucking sink. That's a silly example, but I hope you catch my drift. And as far as isolation, I used to be more of an extrovert, and over time I've become much more introverted, getting trapped in my own head. I've kind of isolated myself. Having 3 kids and working opposite schedules from your wife, it's a lot easier to end up being isolated because, if you want to go to your friend's house 45 minutes away, the kids don't get home from school until 3:30, 4 o'clock. Well, then you got to make sure they get supper by the time you get there. It just ends up being pointless. And so I have, in part, isolated myself to maintain a healthier, structured schedule for my children. Get off the bus, take care of the lunch boxes, make sure there's no food left in there that could, rot and stink up the lunch box. Get your homework out. Let's go over your assignments from the day. Any homework you may have. All right, you guys each have to read at least 20 minutes. So pick a book you'd like to read, sit down, get that done. I'll listen, but I'm also going to go ahead and get supper started by the time you're finishing up your reading. I got to change diapers and blah, 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 blah with the youngest. You do the dishes after, hold on, back it up. You make dinner, you serve dinner, you eat with your kids, you clean up after dinner, put the leftovers away, wash up the dishes, finish washing up the kitchen, and by the time you know it, there's not much time for anything else. So I would consider that a justifiable excuse because I almost thought that I was hiding from people before, and it's really just not many people I know want to come hang out here for the sake of hanging out. And I'm okay with that, but on the flip side, I also don't want to... I have too many things that I want to accomplish in a given day. And so though it is fun to hang out with people, it can't be a regular basis for me because I don't necessarily want to spend X amount of time on the road because most of my friends and family live far enough away that to visit them is half the day shot in the ass. And if I'm dragging 3 kids along for the ride, I feel like I can't relax because I'm having to take care of the kids or keep an eye on the kids. I have to be a parent. I'm not saying, oh, because I have kids, I don't want to do this. It's just, it ends up being to do anything, even pleasantry visits, end up being so much effort just to get to the place where we'll be hanging out that by the time I get there, I'm already irritated enough, at least mentally exhausted enough from the day I had, work, then taking care of the kids, and then, now we got to go do this. Do we have the diaper bag all packed up? Blah, 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 blah. Everything that goes into it to go hang out for an hour and a half, 2 hours, just meh. And honestly, I'm to a point in my life where if I'm spending time with somebody outside of my home, I would like it to be productive. And so with the first edition of Rawcast, that was how I socialized outside of work and home, by having friends and acquaintances and even family members come sit down and have a chat. I love meaningful discussions. That's why I do podcasting. Rawcast has become more of like self-therapy and me thinking my emotions out. Feeling the emotions out, processing them, analyzing them, and trying to absorb them in a healthy manner so that I can continue to grow as a person. That's the bottom line of what we're looking at with Rawcast. And though I feel like this is a necessary activity for myself, for my own well-being, and hopefully that like Reaganomically trickles down to instilling better behaviors in my children. Not that they're bad kids whatsoever, but the more I figure out my faults and flaws and work on them, the better I will be able to help them if they deal with emotional struggles or mental issues of any kind. Not necessarily any kind, but at the very least, I'll be able to help them as far as I can help them. And if they do require assistance or guidance from a professional, I am somebody who wants to normalize talking about mental issues. And so rather than say, you need help, as I heard from a few people throughout my life, it was always meant as like a derogatory thing to say. You need help. But yes, I do need help, and you don't need to be a cocksucker about it. So thank you for being a jackass. But all those people that said that along the way, not that there's a lot, there's maybe 3 or 4, since I was maybe 10, using a shitty tone to say you need help as if it's an insult, rather than saying, hey, wait a minute, he does need help. So I can't blame my parents necessarily. They did the best they could with the information they had, but as an adult, it's now up to me to figure it out, and unfortunately, I procreated before I could figure out my own shit. So, dealing with the hand I was dealt, I'm working on it. But so death, isolation, meaning in life, and freedom. Death is the constant reminder. It's what we all have in common. We will all die someday. And if that's not motivation enough to get off your ass and get some shit done, to basically act. There's a time for thinking, there's a time for action, and as you all know, I spent far too much time thinking and not enough time acting. So I've turned that around. I'm much more productive around the house. My mind is much more active. I feel like I was able to open doors to different parts of my mind again. The mental block was gone because I didn't realize that by actually thinking too much, I was driving that mental block in my head. Into my head, if you will. So death is the bottom line motivator. I haven't accomplished enough in life yet, and I never know with a potentially dangerous job that I have when it's going to be time to pay the piper, if that's a correct usage of that phrase. So the podcasting is birthed from my isolation. It's not that I have a general dislike of people. I'm just much more selective, as I've talked about on previous episodes. I like to spend my time with deep thinkers and creators. I went to school for arts management because everything else sounded so boring, so dreadful. It sounded like it would be so mentally and emotionally draining, exhausting, and taxing that I thought, what better avenue for graduating in college, or graduating from college, than working with the arts? For me, it was specifically going into working with musicians. But that's the thing. I like to talk to people that are working on their own thing. I like to talk to people who are having really deep thoughts, whether they're discussing the universe, certain topics within science. Mental health is becoming one of those because it's a fascinating subject. It's very individualistic, and so there's no fucking ibuprofen for mental health issues. And if you're going to go ahead and say, oh, well, there's medications for these, blah, blah, blah. Yes. I think we've already had that talk. And as I learn more about specific mental issues and the prescribed medications for said issues, I'd like to talk about that more. But I'm still very ignorant, had my own bad experiences with antidepressants, because it's not what I needed. If anything, antidepressants just made me not think at all. And I couldn't do that. So podcasting is like my saving grace from isolation. It's where I can at least say I feel productive by getting my thoughts on this audio medium. Maybe it'll help people someday if they encounter it. I don't know. For now, it's at least helping me. And then I'm not able to encapsulate every interest of mine or every aspect of my personality through having these discussions on Rawcast. And so my wife and I got my 3 bitches, or my 3B, as we call it, to play it safe with these social media platforms so that we don't get kicked off and basically be exiled into trying to create a website with our very limited knowledge and making our jobs much harder than it needs to be. But My 3 Bitches is a podcast where my wife and I are able to sit down, and it's our excuse for date night. It's where we get to bond. And surprisingly, even with the earlier edition of Rawcast, I would basically get the soundboard set up halfway decent, and we'd sit down and talk. But My 3 Bitches is turning into something so much more. We came up with the concept, it sounded fun, and it sat on the back burner for almost 6 months. My kids call this room in which I'm recording Rawcast Studio, but to the right of me right now, the back wall of this basement bedroom that we turned into an office/sound studio is currently under construction of sorts. We're painting the back wall and drawing up a logo on that wall because we're soon going to be launching a video component. So we're moving My 3 Bitches to YouTube. It's actually becoming a pet project that we are going to give real effort to and sticking to a game plan and executing that plan. So it's becoming a real thing. I'm not saying it's going to become successful so that, we're not going to have to work conventional jobs anymore, but it feels good to do it. And what I recognized in myself after recording the last episode of My Three Bitches is that I felt really goddamn good. We recorded 2 episodes in one day. I was riding high. It was a good sales month high. I was just, yes, this felt really productive. I had a great time. It was super fun. And then the next day, listened to the episode, and the audio turned out like absolute dog shit. And so I did get down in the dumps. Like, I had so much fun doing this, and it sounds like absolute dog shit. It felt like a waste. And so I spent hours upon hours getting down to the nitty-gritty split seconds and adjusting the sound levels. I was mixing. I spent too much time in post-production. And so it made me realize that if I want to take this to the next level, what I have to do is really dial in that soundboard, adjust how I go about talking on these podcasts, because I left my levels for this microphone, but I talk in a more quiet voice for Rawcast, and I was getting much too excitable with My Three Bitches. But in listening back to that audio, what I didn't anticipate was that I would learn even more about myself. I would learn about my marriage that I wasn't aware of. And that's, to get into that, basically, I didn't realize that my wife ends up being a little more subservient to me, and that I talk over her enough. I don't give her enough time to explain her thoughts. And so I needed to take a step back and let her shine more. So it was interesting how being kind of depressed and slogging through the mud of the mixing and post-production, because I really don't necessarily enjoy doing that kind of work, but that was my punishment for not taking it seriously before we got started and really honing my skills, or developing the skills, not honing them, but at least getting a start to the development of a skill set that would help me take podcasting to the next level. And right now, I'll be honest with you, I feel like Rawcast is necessary. It helps me slow things down, process my thoughts, and it gives me a good excuse to do those things. But the best chance to actually create a successful podcast is My Three Bitches all day. So what is Rawcast Studio? We're painting up that wall. We're turning it's going to be Rawcast Studio with the My Three Bitches backdrop. But it's just amazing to me that a simple idea that I had and discussed with my wife that sat on the back burner for months is now giving me a taste of freedom. It's giving me some meaning in life other than being a dad, other than being a mail carrier. Because, yes, I'm a mail carrier, but does that mean that I'm like gung-ho about it? Fuck no. It's a job. I'm not my job. I'm Doug. I'm the host of Rawcast AD, co-host of My Three Bitches podcast, a father of 3 great sons, and from mixing those 2 episodes of My Three Bitches, dedicating myself to being a better husband. And so let's take a look at that again. This My Three Bitches is something that I really wanted to do with my wife, Jessica. It sounded like a fun idea, a good excuse for us to entertain each other. You know, we didn't really expect it to become an overnight success. But with death as the motivation for, hey, I need to be productive. I feel like I need to create in some way because I'm not a very good artist. I don't have the patience to become a good musician. But I enjoy working with the arts. I enjoy working with creators. It's like death was the motivation for me to get going. So that death anxiety is keeping me going. Hey, burning daylight, got to get it done. Because one day, the last night is coming. That was a little bit of a nod or a wink to Majora's Mask, Legend of Zelda, Dawn of the Final Day. But so with death being that fuel, that constant reminder, that a little kiss of death anxiety to remind me to keep going, to keep being motivated and productive. And with podcasting currently addressing my social isolation, it's not to a healthy level yet, but I still talk to my small handful of good friends. We support each other in our own endeavors. So I love all of you very much. But I'm scratching that itch for that socializing. So I'm addressing the isolation concern for the time being. And then the fact that these episodes are forever ingrained in the internet. That helps with a little bit of meaning in life. This My Three Bitches podcast is giving me that meaning in life where I feel motivated. And it was amazing how I experienced the super high and the super low, but that's life. And so I'm learning how to deal with that too. Not to get too caught up in the high and to not drown myself in the lows. But having addressed the ultimate concerns of death, isolation, and meaning in life, I now feel like, at the very least, My Three Bitches, if you haven't checked it out, please do. The My Three Bitches podcast that I do with my wife, that makes me feel like I'm on a trajectory toward freedom. They talk about the American dream. Well, yeah, I've got a regular job. My wife has a regular job. We procreated. We have 3 kids. We have a roof over our heads. We got food on the table. All those basic bases are covered. But it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like we've been in survival mode nonstop. And so when you go ahead and fall back to the staring at the sun, there was something in there that really resonated with me because this is more of a self-therapy. I'm not somebody who has the privilege of going to see a therapist on a weekly basis. But like I was saying before, how I got to partition my mind to feel out those emotions, but also be able to take that step back and not let myself get lost to the void so that I can kind of, from a bird's eye view, analyze the situation. Dr. Yalom had mentioned that with some of his patients, they had to define the therapeutic alliance in order to safely ruminate on the topic of death anxiety during, I'm losing the word now, during his sessions. And so, tweaking that a little bit, I had to define my self-therapeutic alliance in order to safely ruminate on the topic of death anxiety. I had to not be hard on myself and let myself be free to feel. And that was no easy task because I've always been one to joke that some of the more prideful, arrogant people in this life need a little more self-loathing. And the thing is, I've victimized myself with self-loathing. Yes, I'm bread. I'm nothing but carbs. I've victimized myself with self-loathing so much that I didn't like who I was as a person, but I wasn't doing anything to change it necessarily. I was just perpetually punishing myself for being human. And so I did have to ease up on myself in order to safely ruminate on the topic of death anxiety and take stock and evaluate my current life. It was fascinating to me. And, talking about how I like to associate with deep thinkers. Like, if I'm going to spend time with you, let's have a deep conversation. There was a part in Staring at the Sun by Dr. Irvin Yalom that made me think. Again, this whole book made me think. Imagine that. A book about existential psychotherapy made me think. But in the book Staring at the Sun, he's talking with a patient named James, and they had this really in-depth conversation, and then James started breaking down crying. So when Dr. Yalom asked him why he was crying, James, who had mentioned that he worked in the financial industry in some fashion, and he worked a lot. He was a bit of a workaholic, if I remember correctly. But he was crying because he told Dr. Yalom that the conversation they had just had was an intellectual conversation. And he was crying because that was the first intellectual conversation he had had since he could remember, because all of his conversations, since he worked so much, were about money. And he personally felt deep down that money was meaningless, that none of those conversations in his daily life had any meaning, had any depth, had any value. And so that made me feel a little bit better about the fact that I prefer to interact with creators and intellectuals. I no longer feel bad about admitting to the fact that I don't necessarily want to associate with knuckle draggers, because though they can be entertaining from time to time, I like a little thought behind the actions. But there was another spot in the book. I talked about how we felt like we were not free because we were operating in survival mode, non-frickin' stop. And it took me back to college days, actually, because in Staring at the Sun, they talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that's Dr. Abraham Maslow. And his hierarchy of needs was first shown to me in college in a business class. Now, in those business classes, I knew what I knew. I had rough ideas, but when it came down to the nuts and bolts of supply and demand and figuring out the calculations as to, how many bouquets of flowers Pat should do up in order to maximize her profits. You're getting down into the nuts and bolts of money, and I feel like, bottom line, that is meaningless to me. I'm more interested in humanity than I am business. I mean, maybe that'll change someday, but out of all those business classes I have taken, which with my Johnson school, I've taken about 5 or 6 intro to business classes, and that's not even talking about the actual macroeconomics, microeconomics, business marketing, none of that stuff. I'm talking intro to business, your 100 level classes that were mandatory in every little fucking academic endeavor I took part in. But one thing that stuck with me with every one of those classes was the graph of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And now picture a pyramid. There's different categories of needs. You start at the base of the pyramid for your physiological needs. And these are the things you absolutely need to survive. So we're talking air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. Well, between my wife and I, we were able to satisfy all those so far. You know, we're breathing clean air. You know, we're not living in California, and my heart goes out to you folks. Can't catch a fucking break out there, can ya? We got clean water. We got food on the table. We got a roof over our heads. We're able to sleep at night. We got clothing on our backs, and we definitely have reproduced. At least 3 times that I'm aware of. But once you have those physiological needs met, once you can check off those boxes, then you're able to move up to the next category on the pyramid to satisfy those needs. And those are the needs of safety. Your personal security, your employment, resources, health, property. And yeah, personal security. I mean, we have some guns in the house. We're hunters. We also have a 9mm because we used to be neighbors with a fucking heroin dealer. You know, you got to take care of your personal security. We both have jobs. Therefore, we both have the resources. You know, we have a little garden. We hunt. We fish. So we're able to provide that, you know, resources, man, tools. We got what we need. Our health, we have that for the most part, but because we're working poor, we avoid the doctor as much as fucking possible. And I just hope that one day we don't have to avoid it until it's too late. But then, of course, property. Yeah, we own 0.2 acres in a really small potato-eating conservative town in central Wisconsin, but we have our property. So we got physiological needs and safety needs established. For the most part, then you can move on to love and belonging, your friendship, intimacy, family, a sense of connection. And to some degree, we have all of those satisfied too. But because those are basically needs, I mean, friendship, yeah, it'd be nice if we could see our friends more often, but we're dealing the hand we've been dealt. And the hand we were dealt more often than not in all these categories and topics were based on our own choices. So after love and belonging, you were able to move up to esteem, where that's respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom. And because of me beating myself over the head mentally, I haven't been able to satisfy the needs under the esteem category. So having the physiological needs, the safety needs, and the love and belonging covered, but actually exacerbating my attempts at esteem, then it was just running on fumes trying to achieve the final top category of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization. And this is the desire to become the most that one can be. And so I was surprised to hear that the hierarchy of needs was mentioned in Staring at the Sun, because it made me realize that though I've checked off the boxes for physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging, the attempts at self-actualization were at best half-assed because I wasn't seriously taking the time to care about myself and establish the esteem. I wasn't checking off the esteem box. It's like I was trying to take that category of the pyramid and just chucking it and moving on to the very tip for that self-actualization. And now, surprisingly, after reading a book about death anxiety from an existential psychotherapist perspective, I'm taking strides towards checking off that esteem box, because I do want to be the best person that I can be, but I'm not going to get there by treating myself like shit. So I know we've covered the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I find very important with me. Sorry, I got a message. I'm going to have to end this pretty soon here. But so I had been familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs over the years and never really took it seriously enough to figure out where I was. You know, how many of those boxes I was able to check off on that checklist. And so through staring at the sun, I was able to come across the ultimate concerns of the deep structures of existence through death, isolation, meaning in life, and freedom. And by really taking a good hard look at these two lists, I feel like I have better understanding of where I'm at. Not better understanding of myself, but a better understanding of where I'm at and what I need to do to move forward and continue the activities that I've been doing to continue adding to this meaning in life that I'm feeling. And together, maybe Rawcast will get there someday. For now, that's not what I'm looking for. But with my three bitches, this is turning into a project, a pet project of ours that we're taking seriously enough that this might be our pursuit of happiness and our ticket to freedom, in a sense. But these are things that I've been ruminating over, and I feel better about it, at least in going forward. Because good feelings don't have to be felt just when you cross the finish line, but when you take that first step across the starting line, that's the start of progress right there. And so that first step may only be one step, but it's a step that is absolutely necessary to get to where you want to go. And I've already taken that step. God damn. Feels good, everybody. And if this is something that you needed to hear and can apply to your own life to live a better you, that's great. But if not, that's okay, because I feel better. But thank you for tuning in for another episode of Rawcast AD. If you haven't noticed, I have been dropping the episodes, the frequency of episodes down. It is going to be a weekly thing. Wednesday mornings at 7 a.m., the new episodes of Rawcast AD will be up. Sunday mornings at 7, the new episodes of My Three Bitches will be up. And keep an eye out, because if all goes as planned within the next 2 weeks, My Three Bitches will be moving primarily over to YouTube with a video component. Though SoundCloud, My3B, the episodes will still be there for audio only. But until then, don't think too much. By all means, please think, and think deep. But there's a time to think and a time to act. And we all have to find that fine line. So be in good mental health until we meet again.